Hello, welcome to another enlightening episode of Full Throttle, brought to you on Unprecedented TV in association with the Alliance of British Drivers. You may you may understand that I'm a little bit under the weather today. I've got some sort of throat infection, so I have been lovingly referred to by my co-host Brian as Mr. Croaky. So Mr. Croaky is here today, and we're also joined by Economist, trade expert and commentator Catherine McBride, a leading voice on trade, energy, regulation, and economic growth, whose analysis has challenged many of the assumptions behind Britain's current economic policies.
Morning, I'm Brian Gregory. I'm Policy Director of the Alliance of British Drivers. And as Paul's explained, we're going to talk to Catherine McBride this morning. From rising energy costs and industrial competitiveness to trade and economic reform, Catherine's never been afraid to ask difficult questions and challenge the consensus. We're looking forward to hearing her insights on the challenges facing Britain and what needs to change to get the country moving again. So buckle up. This is Full Throttle.
Morning, Catherine. Hiya.
Good morning. I'm glad to be here again.
Well, I am. Believe it or not, I'm glad to be here, even though I feel like this. But just in case my voice fails later, I'll ask the first question. So, your latest paper describes Britain's premeditated industrial destruction. What are the biggest policy mistakes behind it?
There's a lot. There's this assumption that we now see is not a good one, that you will be able to import all things at all times for a low price. We're now discovering you can import all things at all times, but it's at a very, very high price. And that's not always, that's not going to end well if you look at it. And a lot of things that we were very good at making, we are now outsourcing to other countries. And one of the reasons we've done that is we've put massive amounts of taxes and environmental regulations onto our own producers, who have since gone out of business because of those costs. Yeah. But we're importing things from countries that don't have those taxes and environmental regulations. Yeah. So we're giving ourselves a gold star for saving the planet, when in fact all we've done is import emissions from other countries. Yeah. So the more I look at it, I suspect the calculations made or the accounting system used to calculate how you cut your emissions was probably invented by the British. We seem to know exactly how to play this game and pretend we're cutting our emissions. So importing gas from the North Sea, from Norway, doesn't add to our emissions, where using our own gas from the North Sea would. And exactly. We're doing insane things like that, which are hurting our economy. Yeah. Destroying jobs, lowering tax collection. Yeah. You just couldn't make this up. They're thinking that's the point of government, is to keep industries going, keep taxes coming in so they can spend them on the socialist nirvana they're all looking for. You're going, well, you've got to have jobs to do that. Someone's got to pay the tax. And to drive industries out of business is not helping.
No. Absolutely spot on. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, the government keeps whittering on about growth and how they need growth, but all of their policies actually operate in the opposite direction. And then, of course, they bring out the spectre of Brexit and say, oh, well, it's all Brexit's fault. What's your view on that?
Well, the Brexit is funny. The EU was the perfect scapegoat when we were part of it. So everything our own politicians did that was bad was blamed on the EU. And now we've left, Brexit has taken that position. So now everything that's gone wrong is because of Brexit. And our politicians refuse to admit that it's their own policies that are the problem.
Yeah.
So one of the big things that I used to blame on the EU, which is the emissions trading scheme, which the EU introduced in 2005, before anyone else in the world had even thought about doing this. So any production that emitted carbon dioxide, the producers of that had to pay for the emissions. They had to buy an allowance. So it was paying the government a tax to allow you to pollute. A lot of green people were very, environmentalists were very anti this because they said it was a license to pollute, which it kind of was, especially in the UK where the money raised went straight into general revenue collection. In the EU, there are some countries that actually put that money into environmental production of some kind.
Yeah.
But I always thought that was an EU thing, and so I was very anti that. I've now discovered that, in fact, Tony Blair, who's seen the light, and I'm, a sinner of, repents is better than, whatever. But
anything involving Mr. Blair, I'm always highly suspicious of. But anyway, let's carry on.
I've recently discovered, so it's not in my paper, I discovered that it was the Blair government invented the idea of an emissions trading scheme, and the UK trialled it before the EU imposed it on all EU countries in 2005. We actually were trialling it before that in 2002, but only for companies that volunteered. So it was a voluntary thing before 2005 in the UK. Which I didn't realise. And then in the EU said, okay, it's mandatory, you've all got to do it. So, yes, it's kind of weird that they're blaming things on Brexit that they did themselves.
I think that it's an attack on Brexit is an indirect attack at Nigel Farage, really, isn't it? As he is seen as an architect of Brexit.
Well, I do think that they feel that this might help them win an election against reform. Yeah. But it is kind of weird that right now they're trying to win an election in a very strongly voting area. And in fact, they haven't looked at the map and gone, oh, look, all of these old Labor areas where people had real jobs and did real things, they'd made stuff, and we drove them out of business with our stupid carbon taxes. And now they're not voting for us anymore. Now they voted to leave the EU. And they're trying to pretend that we have now the same levels of youth unemployment in the UK as they used to have, or they still have in the EU.
Yeah.
And we've done that, that is entirely to do with Rachel Reeves, who's put up the cost of employing a young person to the same level as employing someone with some experience and skills.
Yeah.
They've also put up the cost of employment by increasing the national insurance that employers have to pay. And that was completely ridiculous. I can actually justify putting up wages a lot more than putting up the national insurance on employment.
Yeah.
In a way, because, if people get higher wages, they will spend that money. And that's good for the environment, especially if they spend the money in the UK.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the problems we had when we were members of the EU is we had a lot of people who came to work here from EU Eastern European countries, but they sent a lot of the money back to their families who remained living in Romania or Bulgaria or wherever. So, which is obviously that's fantastic for the economies of Bulgaria and Romania, but it's not good for the economy of the UK. But the EU didn't care about that because they looked at the EU as a whole. And they did this in competition policy. They did this in a lot of areas where the industrial strength of the EU, the UK and Germany and France, kept losing out as more and more industry was subsidized by the EU to go to Eastern Bloc countries. So it's kind of incredible. The more you look into the EU, the more you know about it, the worse you can see it was for the UK. And yet we still have these supposed economists who, interestingly, mainly live and work in the US, who still think that the UK should be a member of the EU, and they're writing these convoluted econometric papers trying to prove that our economy would be 8% higher if we were still in the EU, which shows that they really don't understand how the EU works. Because if our economy was 8% higher, if our GDP was 8% higher, the EU would tax us more. We would have to pay a lot more of that money. We would be paying way more than Germany We would be absolutely funding the EU because EU taxes are based on your GDP. And the guys who wrote this paper don't even know that. They are just shills who are being paid to support the EU, or they believe in global government, or I don't know where they came from, but you're sitting there going, no, if we made more money, the EU would take it and give it to Poland and Bulgaria and, you know, Romania and all of this. And they're going to invite all these people in from the rest of the former Yugoslav countries. So, you know, it won't be long before any money we were making would be sent to Serbia and you know, Montenegro and whatever, you know.
Fantastic.
But I mean, all these sort of American experts should maybe look closer to home and notice that what's the growth rate in America? 4%, and ours is sort of 0.1% or something like that. Whatever you think of Trump and his intemperance, you know, his intemperate sort of attitude and his odd personality quirks, he does seem to have galvanized the American economy, whereas ours is, well, it's spiraling down the plug hole.
Yeah.
Yes, and what's interesting is it's I'm actually quite fond of the whole Trump administration. I'm particularly impressed by their energy minister, Chris Wright.
Yes,
I want the UK to put a bid in that we take him as our energy minister.
And we'll give them Miliband. We will actually pay them to take Miliband off our hands.
No, to bring in Chris Wright, swap him.
Oh, yeah, absolutely,
Miliband, you know.
But send Miliband over there.
Their environmental secretary, also, you know, Worth is Lee Zeldin. We should use him. We could bring him over, take over DEFRA. You know, they could run the UK so much better than we're doing it ourselves. But what's interesting is that the US realized a long time ago that this deindustrialization is a problem, and it wasn't just Trump. I mean, Trump started putting tariffs on China back in his first term, but Biden not only didn't take those tariffs off, he kept them, and he later, in the end of his term, doubled them. But he also subsidized, he threw huge amounts of money at companies to get them to come back on onshore in the US. So we had the sort of carrot and the stick between the Republicans and the Democrats. So the Republicans were into tariffs to get people to come back, and the Democrats were into huge subsidies to get people to come back. And now we've got Trump, the second Trump administration is again going back to tariffs. And between the two of them, industry is coming back to the UK, and between the two of them, coming back to the US, not the UK. Sorry, whoops. Yes, it's coming back to the US, which is great. Because when people look at what Trump's doing and say, oh, it's a terrible trade policy, and I believe in free trade, they have no idea that there is no free trade. There is no country that welcomes free trade. Even the EU not only restricts trade outside of the EU, not only with tariffs, massive tariffs, but also with non-tariff barriers. They keep a whole lot of things out. But they also, there's a lot of barriers within the EU now. So the whole single market is falling apart. And Mario Draghi has talked about this and how everyone is putting up borders. And there's really good reason for doing that. If you read my latest Substack, you will discover that there's been outbreaks of foot and mouth disease in now 5 different countries in the EU. And it started with a very small herd of water buffaloes in Germany, and then started hitting dairy farms in Hungary with thousands of animals. And then it gets to Slovakia, again, 10,000 animals in Slovakia. Now it's in Greece and Cyprus. And, you know, they have the most extraordinary problem with African swine fever, which has been going on now for 4 years. And, you know, so it's no surprise to me that their single market is closing down and everyone is going, whoa, we don't want anything to do with our neighbours, you know.
And yet we're being sort of quietly thrust back into the EU by our lovely Prime Minister.
And not even the good parts of the EU. We're going into the bad parts. We're going to they're going to control our SPS policies. So they are not only going to make our rules, they're going to enforce them, because the only people that can enforce or adjudicate on EU rules is the ECJ. and all of our rules will be EU rules. So
And we'd
therefore, only
yeah.
the ECJ can determine whether we're right or wrong.
And this
So we
time
won't
round,
even be able
we'd
to-
have no say. We'd have no say in what happens either.
No, we'd have no say, and we couldn't dispute anything. We just have to accept the fact that we're about to get African swine fever like everyone else in the EU.
Yeah.
It's like, what?
Yeah.
Why are they doing this? It is absolutely insane.
It is.
The one group of countries you would not want to follow in any SPS rules is the EU. What is interesting, I was challenged on this in the House of Lords by a Labour lord who refused to admit that the EU was not nirvana. And when I said it was some of the worst in the world, in fact, I said the worst I had ever seen. And he said, "Oh, have you ever left the EU, the UK? Do you know anything?" He said, "Well, yeah, actually, I'm Australian. I've gone to a lot of countries. This is my job. I'm a trade economist."
Yeah.
Anyhow, so I then started looking into it, and I can tell you that all of the Americas are foot and mouth disease free. Last outbreak was in the island of Haiti, basically. Which is pretty much,
it's not exactly America.
Had a few
mainland
problems lately, and most of the, all of the CPTPP countries, the more you look into it, the more you go, yeah, actually, foot and mouth disease, that's the EU's problem at the moment,
Yeah.
Same with African swine fever. The only areas of the world where there are sort of similar outbreaks to the EU, you get into sort of Vietnam's bad, and that's a CPTPP country. The other ones like Singapore and Malaysia had outbreaks which they contained very quickly. And then you've got them in places like, Timor and Papua New Guinea and, not third world, developing countries. I don't know what the correct term is these days, but,
Yeah.
Developing countries, maybe.
Yeah. The EU is claiming to be this better than everyone, developed place. And yet you've got outbreaks in Sweden, Spain, Italy, France. Not France. France is clean. Germany, definitely. Germany, they seem to all start in Germany, weirdly. And yet somehow or other, we're meant to adopt their rules and have certificate-free borders with the EU. But we are going to have to move the certificate part to our ports. So when goods come from outside the EU, we will be there policing them for the EU. Get this is the important point. The UK is about to adopt laws that protect its supplier, the EU, to the detriment of its own producers, UK farmers and food producers, to the detriment of its other suppliers outside the EU. We're adopting laws that protect our suppliers to the detriment of our consumers, our producers, and our other suppliers. This is ridiculous, and Labour are so hoodwinked, so in love with the EU, so unable to even look at it clearly and go, actually, our relationship before was one of a battered wife, and it's about time that we pulled it out and left.
It's an abusive relationship, absolutely.
Yeah.
Politically
And
abusive, socially
and now we've got
abusive.
these guys saying, "Oh no, it'll all be different." You go, why would it be different? Why would it be different next time? We can look at their records since we left. Germany and France are two of the countries that are doing worse than the UK. But weirdly, the economists sitting in US universities, who are mainly British, by the way, but they've chosen to live in the US rather than the EU, please note that. So living in the US, saying that, "Oh, you British people that are stuck there, you should join the EU," and yet you go, well, France is actually not doing any better than us, and Germany is doing considerably worse than us. So what part of would be good for us being in the EU? How would that work?
I think, but there's an element here of these armchair experts sitting across the Atlantic. If you look at their political orientation, if you like, and you look at the political orientation of the teaching profession in the UK, for example, you will find that overwhelmingly their policies are left of centre, shall we say. But I think we need to redraw the Overton window, because left and right are probably meaningless, and it's more command and control, totalitarian at one end and libertarian at the other. And the Labour Party is definitely in that sort of command and control mindset. And they think the more regulations and the more control there is, the more they can control society and obtain the outcomes they want, even if those outcomes are completely destroying our economy, employment prospects, industry, wealth. It takes a particular sort of nihilistic point of view to sign on to those things. Personally, I believe.
No. I think I read an interesting report this week as well about the number of the teaching profession that are actively identify as supporting the left. And that's, I can't help thinking that's got to be correlated to the number of children we have that are A, unemployed, or B, unemployable, where people are, by the time they leave school, have decided they have all sorts of disabilities that and not physical ones, sort of mental anxiety or something. And that makes it impossible for them to ever work. So they immediately go onto some kind of government assistance. And that, I think, is coming from our teaching profession, which is overly empathetic. And I suspect that this may be very old school, and I am old school, but I went through school at a time when you had an exam at the end of the year. In fact, we had tests every week, starting in primary school. You had to know your times table and how to spell things, and that was a weekly thing. End of term, you had some sort of exam. End of the year, you had a much bigger exam. Halfway through high school, you had a statewide exam. End of high school, another statewide exam. So we didn't suffer from anxiety because we'd had that level of pressure all the way through. If you've never had any pressure, if it's always been on coursework, and because we're feeling a bit sick today, we'll give you a special pass, or you get special exemption because you're a little bit dyslexic. But I didn't get that. I'm dyslexic. It's like I just became the best in the maths class. So everyone went, well, she's a bit slow at reading, but she's really good at maths. So we'll just skip over the fact that her reading is a bit slow. She can't spell, and but it's okay because now I've got spell check on my computer.
Of course, now everybody has to have a prize. There are no losers in the education system. But the simple fact is that ultimately society, it used to decide, or it used to be decided on your merits where you ended up. But now the press seems to be to make everybody so similar and dumb everybody down. So I read something that basically said it was done by a behavioral scientist who was also an economist, and he said that the human intellectual capabilities peaked in the 1870s, and we've been getting stupider ever since. And the people who are left of centre were getting stupider than the people who are middle to right of centre. So not only are we all getting dumber, but the left are getting even dumber than we are. You see what I mean?
Well,
it was called, they described it as the Rayner effect.
Well, there is a bit of that. I would say since the 1870s, there have been huge advances in all knowledge. So that if you understood the science of the 1870s, which was good science, no problem with that. But since then, the amount of science that we have that you should learn about, is quadrupled, maybe, 20 times more. And where there are other studies which probably haven't changed, though I'm sure all the psychologists like to think that they've invented new things and whatever, but I have a feeling human psychology hasn't changed very much in 1,000
eons, probably.
Where some areas have changed enormously, and so there's also more distractions.
Yes, absolutely.
And and we have a media that's incredibly good at distracting us.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
you watch the BBC and they skip over the important news to tell you about some completely unimportant news. Which
Yeah.
is,
Like
and you
like
think,
whether.
why is that leading the BBC News today? And
Yeah.
it's because they don't want you to know about the important news. They want to distract you with this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They don't
And
want
they
you to
do.
think about the
And we all
importance.
get very up in arms about something that, in the big scheme of things, probably doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know?
It's a it's a meh issue,
Or
really.
it's after the fact. So
Yeah.
we can now all get on and apologize that a university student died because the policeman handcuffed him for being a racist or something, or being accused of being a racist. And you're going, the man was stabbed and he's bleeding to death, and
Yeah.
you're worried about that he potentially is a racist? Like, hello,
Yeah.
the priorities are
Wake up and smell the
ridiculous.
coffee. Yeah.
The recent case where a judge let the rapists off, 2 rapists got off because I have no idea why.
Because they were well behaved in court. That was one of the things.
Exactly. The fact that they were really badly behaved outside court, that's not a problem.
I'm sure Goering was well behaved in court as well at Nuremberg.
Yeah. They were incredibly well behaved according to the film, but unfortunately a lot of them got off too. A hell of a lot of them got off. That is a very depressing part about Nuremberg that doesn't often get into the history that we get taught at school. But I do recommend, if you go to Berlin and go to the SS Museum, which is the most fantastic museum. It's a very modern building on basically a bomb site. It's rubble all around it. They didn't clear it up. That's where they blew up the headquarters of the SS. And it goes through the whole history of how these evil people took over Germany, and eventually it gets to the trials and explains how many of them got off. Because there was no one else to run Germany. So they needed to let them continue. And it's interesting that you bring this up now, because the more I think about it, the more I think that's what's going on here.
Yes.
We're very slowly getting taken on this journey. And I think you're right. It's not left and right. It's a sort of a totalitarian globalist who like to think of themselves as the good guys. And you go, no, you want to be in control. And unfortunately, the moment you get that control, there'll be a nasty guy who'll come and shoot you and take over. And we know that's going to happen because that's what's always happened.
Yes.
And we are on that journey right now of slowly, a little bit at a time, we're getting taken over and we're getting pushed down this road. And eventually, if there is some way of getting rid of them, we'll discover that there's no one else to run the place. So they end up getting off. And that's what happened in Germany. It's very depressing. And we have a whole generation of children who believe themselves to be incapable of doing anything. And that intrigues me.
Well, I mean, touching on something that you spoke about before, kids these days at school are being taught a very different history course than I would have learned. There's nothing about the Second World War. If there is anything about the Second World War, it makes us look like we need to be very apologetic. And it's all done with very much a left leaning. And in this country, we've got, not only in our education system have we got very left leaning, we've also got a media that is very left leaning. We've got a police force which doesn't appear to be able to do what a police force should. It's been utilized in a political way rather than in a common sense way. And so when you've got so many factors that are being politically led, it's very difficult to break that cycle and return it to, particularly for education. My kids, I will say something to my kids, and it's nothing that I would deem to be controversial. And they're like, whoa, you can't say that, Dad. And my kids are like 25 and 22. And it's like, why? What's wrong with that? It's my opinion. Oh, you can't have an opinion. And that's the scary thing is they're taught not to have an opinion.
Yeah, that is very 1930s Germany.
Yeah.
And that's, I have a 25-year-old as well, and it's the same deal of, she'll say, oh, Mum, you can't say that anymore. And you go, but I just said it, I can say it, and I did.
And we're going to keep saying it as well.
And I stand by it, yeah.
Well, they're terrified of confrontation. This fear of upsetting people. Oh, no, you'll upset people. And you're going, well, so what? You think no one upsets me? You should see the things I'm called on Twitter. And I laugh at it. I don't, the less you react, the more they get angry. And, but that's okay because they're the good guys. So they can be as rude as they like about you because they're good people and you're evil because you don't agree with them. Or in general, you've had more life experience.
Yes.
I mean, look at the Tony Blair situation. How, the old idea that everyone should be a socialist when they're young and a capitalist when they're old. Show me a better example than Tony Blair, who's finally seen the light, finally realized who pays the bills, finally realized that energy is the most important thing in any economy. After all of these years of being the leftist, what's the word I'm looking for?
Icon.
Hero.
Because
he's the only Labour person who's won 3 elections in a row. And now he's suddenly talking things that I'd vote for. Going, well, that's a turnaround for the books. Whereas Andy Burnham wants to be Labour leader, and he was. He's not young. He uses a childish name, Andy, friendly Andy. Don't worry about Andy. But he's actually not quite as old as Starmer but he's of the same generation. He was part of the Blair government. He was a big part of that. And now he's trying to pretend that he's down with the kids and he's really left. And he's, trying to pretend he's a new Zach Polanski or something. You're going, no, you were part of New Labour. Stop that. We know who you are. You left the Labour Party and became mayor when Jeremy Corbyn took over because you refused to work for Jeremy Corbyn. You didn't like the left, Andy. We all know who you are. Stop trying to pretend you're something different, And now he is. He's now, because it's fashionable. We have politicians that follow fashions. He thinks it's fashionable to pretend to be a communist when you're taking someone else's stuff. No one wants to be a communist when it's their stuff that's going.
Exactly.
And like most politicians, they surf waves, they don't make them, generally.
Well, that's true. That is true. They just want to be elected. I mean, unfortunately, you can say the same thing about the Conservative Party.
Oh, indeed,
who are now, claiming they'd reverse all of these laws that they put in place. And you're sort of going, but you did that. That's a Conservative policy. I know Ed Miliband has put them on steroids and, but you started this. You did this, Blair introduced the ETS, the emissions trading scheme, as I mentioned earlier. But it was Cameron and Clegg together, Liberal Democrats are in there too, who pushed it up the price to they added it, the carbon support mechanism, the carbon support price, which made UK carbon taxes higher than any other in the EU, which is why so many industries closed down in the UK and moved to the EU, because we had 2 carbon taxes. And we had a third one called the climate change levy, which was on our electricity bills. And this is all during, Cameron's, let's go to Iceland or Greenland or somewhere and watch the ice melting and then come back and tax people in the UK because more money going into the UK and HMRC will, of course, stop the ice melting in Greenland.
Give us more money and we'll stop the climate change.
Just keep paying more money to the government, which we'll waste on.
So that brings us back to how much damage are high energy costs doing to the UK industry then, Catherine? What I mean,
massive, absolutely massive. It is,
Yeah.
and it's not just the high energy costs. It's because of the government's attitude to so many of these things that people are not investing here.
Yeah.
So, for instance, the two biggest oil refineries in Europe are both in Rotterdam, and one is owned by Shell and the other one is owned by BP.
Yeah.
Both of these are UK listed companies. Shell used to have dual listing, but it moved its entire listing to the UK.
Yeah.
Okay, why did they not choose to build these massive refineries in the UK? Why did they move them into Rotterdam? Well, Rotterdam
Because-
didn't have the double taxes.
Yeah,
B,
the
it's
tax
very well-
regime is punitive.
Yeah, it's very well located with great roads, which, by the way, the EU overlooked the fact that the Dutch government built this amazing road system from its ports. It massively increased the port there and the connections to the port, which is basically state funding, but it wasn't decided to be state funding. Shortly after all of this was done to upgrade all of the European ports in the North Sea, the EU introduced a rule making that illegal for anyone else to do it. So, I could run on crazy EU laws that are put in after the major EU countries had already done it. So we put in a law stopping it after you've done it, so that you guys get away with it, but anyone else who tries it is in trouble.
Yeah, like Britain, for instance.
Yeah, especially Britain. Oh, you'll get double anyhow, because they never liked you. But anyhow, so we've got.
I don't think they've given us the Cressy and Agincourt, never mind Dunkirk, and
Or saving them from Germany. Germany's never forgiven us for preventing them from taking over the whole of Europe the hard way. Now they're just taking it over, the easy way.
Yeah. Well, like the Americans say, by the inch it's a cinch, by the yard it's hard.
Yeah, well, that's
so
true.
You nibble
that's
away.
A very good. Yeah, I should write that down. So, anyhow, so yes, we've got these two big refineries, UK companies, but the refineries are in the EU. Well connected with highways into all the EU countries and back to the UK. So we export the oil to the Netherlands, we import the refined oil back into the UK.
And we shut down our own refineries.
And we've watched two refineries in the UK shut down. Now, admittedly, they were quite small ones. The two smallest ones dropped off, and BP got rid of all of its refineries in the UK several years ago. One of the refineries that closed was the only refinery in the UK directly connected to North Sea oil and gas by pipeline. So the reason the other refineries don't use so much UK oil and gas is because one's at the very south of the country, one's on the Wales coastline. So they actually were built before they discovered oil in the North Sea. And so they were built in places where you could get shipping coming up from Africa or the Gulf. And that was the ideal place to put the refineries. So one of the ones that closed was actually connected up in Scotland, perfectly placed for getting oil and gas out of the North Sea. But that's not to say our refineries don't use oil and gas out of the North Sea, because 40% of the oil we import comes from Norway.
Exactly.
I always thought, Norway supplies 75% of all the gas we import, but they're also supplying us with crude oil. So when people say, Norway's different because their side of the North Sea has all the gas, you're going, oh, really? So where are they getting this crude oil that they're exporting to us? There are so many rumors that the antis are out there spreading around. I appeared on Jacob Rees-Mogg's show last night, and they had me there to talk about tariffs. But that meant I was in the wings listening to two people talking about basically energy, oil and gas. And it shocked me that both of them, supposed experts, were spouting out things that aren't correct, and that things that can be checked on the internet with official publications. It's like, this is not a secret. You don't have to break into the safe at British Petroleum to find out what's going on. The Dukes, the Digest of UK Energy Statistics, is published regularly.
Yeah.
You can
Yeah.
see this. It's all out there on the internet. It's very easy to find. And no one does. They just re-quote stuff that they heard that was a Guardian headline, or some lefty guy said it without looking. Here's another one. I was listening, in fact, someone sent me, Mike Graham did an interview with a climate expert who was actually a climate expert, a climate scientist. And this guy called Jim Dale, I think he's Jim, Dale, and he is a weather guy. And he was apparently a Navy weather guy. So he knows a lot about weather, not climate, weather. And he was claiming that 5 countries have already reached net zero. And when he was questioned which ones, he said, I don't know, you can look it up. So I did. While I was listening to this, I just typed away, let's look this up. Turns out only 3 countries, according to Perplexity, have reached net zero. And then I said, what were their emissions in 1990 and what are their emissions now? How have their emissions come down? Turns out all of their emissions have gone up. The reason Bhutan is net zero is because it's about 90% forests, and it always has been. So it was always net zero because it has virtually no industry and a lot of forests. The other one was Guyana, same deal, a lot of forests, no industry. And then the third one, oh no, it wasn't Guyana, sorry, it was Suriname, next door to Guyana. They had a lot of forests, no industry. And then the third one was Panama, and they only have 30% forests, so about double the UK, but not bad. But the reason they are net zero is because they get attributed for all of the emissions savings when a cargo ship goes through the Panama Canal rather than around South America. So because of the massive rise of international shipping and trade since 1990, the amount they're credited with just goes up and up and up. So they don't have to do anything to reach net zero. They are way, way negative just because so many ships are going through the canal. Now, I get that is a saving, but it's hardly, for Jim Dale to say, oh, we've got 3 countries that have achieved net zero. It's like, no, they didn't achieve net zero. 2 of them were already net zero. All of the emissions have gone up, and one of them just really benefits from the accounting system. To the point where I wonder if the Egyptians are getting the same benefit from the Suez Canal. And, are they also getting this sort of, if they didn't come through here, they'd have to go all the way around Africa. Therefore, you owe us, thousands.
The whole thing, though, Catherine, is an exercise in futility, because humans only produce 3.5% of annual carbon dioxide emissions. So even if we stopped producing anything that generates carbon dioxide, it wouldn't make any difference to the atmosphere, because natural sources produce more than 30 times as much as humans do. So the whole thing's madness. There's no sense to it at all.
It's more than madness, because also the world would benefit. The really mad thing is they've convinced us that somehow global warming is bad. And that is it. They are trying to assume that the weather we had in 1970 is the perfect climate for all countries, and we should keep it. And when you try and say, well, actually, Siberia would be much better off if it was 1 or 2 degrees warmer, as would Canada. I mean, Canada is the real winner. Alaska's right up there. And most of the world's landmass is in the very far north of the world. There's virtually nothing in the southern hemisphere at the same latitude, negative latitudes.
Because it's mostly water.
So it's like there's a lot of land that would really benefit from warmer climate, as would most of Europe, and Norway and Sweden and Finland, Iceland, Greenland. Greenland would be so much better off without all that ice all over it. That would be a booming place to live.
Well, it was at one point during the earlier in the Holocene. The Greenland was green. And that was
Yes.
when the Danes colonized it and had agriculture there. Then the climate changed, got colder, and the Danes had to go back to Denmark or somewhere else because they could no longer farm in Greenland.
Yeah.
So to
And
suggest we've had this stable climate is complete madness. It's rubbish. And if you go far enough back in the historical record, you'll see the loads of ups and downs, and some of them quite large changes in very short time periods, much more aggressive than we've seen over the last sort of 50, 60 years or so, or, you know, since we started doing instrumental temperature measurements. In fact, since we actually started doing any kind of temperature measurements at all at the start of the Industrial Revolution, was the coldest time in the last 10,000 years. So you would hope the temperatures would go up from the coldest time in the last 10,000 years, not down.
Well, on that note, I recommend everyone read a book by Jeffrey Parker called Global Crisis. And it is not about the present one, it's about the 1600s. It is about the Little Ice Age. And that was a terrible time all around the world where there were freezing temperatures, crops were dying, people were starving, there were low birth rates because people couldn't even feed themselves. A lot of communities resorted to cannibalism. It was a shocking time to be alive, and yet that is the ideal that most of these environmentalists would like us to go back to. They're looking at that, where they're going, that's great. And in fact, that was terrible. That is one thing we don't want, is global cooling. If we ever actually measure that the temperature's going down, we all have to turn on that diesel-fired machine outside and keep it running 24/7. Just keep the engine going. Because if carbon dioxide is actually the knob, and I don't think it is, that turns on the climate, then we need more of it to avoid going back into the Little Ice Age. But the other interesting point that about this is that sorry, I've actually forgotten what I was going to say about this. Because I thought of it when you started speaking. Because it's not bad to be warmer. We adapt. Humans live in the Arctic Circle, and they have for a long time. The Inuits have been living there for hundreds, thousands of years. I'm not sure how long. There are people who live and have survived in the Arabian deserts at 50 degrees in the summer. People have survived in the Amazon in the sort of very highly humid environment there. We have the ability to adapt to our climate both physically by building shelters or creating the clothing we need to survive, or finding the sort of food, learning to live off the food that's available, which is why we can't all eat the same food. And it's why some people like me from his relatives or ancient relatives all came from Scotland and the Hebrides and Northern Ireland. They grew up eating protein. They did not have vast wheat fields where they could live on bread. It's not what we did. But we also adapt physically. When I first came to the UK, I couldn't believe how cold it was. All through winter, I would sit right beside the radiator. I would wear my coat inside the house. My Scottish housemate would walk in, I kid you not, the moment she came back from work, she would walk across the room and throw open a window and say, "Oh, it's so stuffy in here." I couldn't believe it. I was sitting there with a coat on inside the house. I was so cold. Now I have become that Scottish woman. I will now walk into a room in winter and throw open a window and say, "God, it's stuffy in here." Whereas my Australian relatives who come, my sister's visiting at the moment from Australia, while the English have been fanning themselves and dying of the heat. She's looking at us like, "This isn't even hot. What are you talking about?" It's just like,
come back in another 10 degrees and it'll be getting warm.
And it'll be getting hot. This is fine. Why are you complaining? And so our physical being adjusts to the temperature that we're used to living in. Our ability to create environments means that we start to learn to live off the food that's available and learn to build the shelters we need or the clothing we need to survive in all temperatures. So
Yeah.
this strange fear that's developed that we can only exist in the temperature that existed in 1970, and that none of us are able to adapt to changes in temperature, or even develop the equipment we need. Lee Kuan Yew famously turned Singapore from a very poor country in 1965 to the world's richest country in GDP per capita. And he credits that not with his brilliance in running the government, but with the invention of air conditioning. He quite happily says in speeches, this was not possible before they invented air conditioning.
Yeah.
And once you invent air conditioning, people they're not just trying to get out of the heat. They're happy to sit and work and do things and build things and create things and, turn Singapore into the most, amazing place on earth. And we all have that ability, but with the UK just banned putting air conditioning into new houses. Yeah. These are the same people that keep telling us that global warming is coming. Yeah. You're going, well, if global warming's coming, children, then I think we're going to need air conditioning.
Yeah.
Personally,
I
think it's a long way off myself, but I've been waiting for it for 30 years, and I can tell you it's still not here.
Yeah.
But,
But there's so many contradictions. I mean, we've got, they're talking about carpet bombing the country with solar arrays, taking away all the agricultural land that would help us to be self-sufficient in food terms. And then they're doing experiments to cause global dimming.
You could not make this
not make it up.
Absolutely. And it is kind of crazy. I think maybe they see the UK as a kind of conveniently located area where they can do experiments, maybe. And because we're an island off the coast of Europe, and we've got people in Parliament who are happy to agree, and I don't know who would agree. I don't know who would decide, oh, you can do the solar dimming above our country. We don't mind. I'm not sure which moron in our government would have agreed to that. I don't know whose department that is, because I don't even think it's in the I don't think it's an energy. It's not a, DESNZ thing. I don't know.
But I think the problem is that many government departments are replete with morons, highly qualified, artistic morons, but morons nonetheless in sort of scientific literacy terms. And that's the problem.
Sixth form ideologies.
We've got government ministers who basically do not understand basic chemistry and basic physics, no understanding whatsoever of energy and energy balance, and basically should be shunted off to useful jobs like emptying bins or some other useful public service, instead of clutching up the top echelons of society at inflated wages they don't deserve, which is what they're doing at the moment. Not just sitting on the fence there, being sort of not the least bit controversial.
No, but maybe everyone needs to do things by hand. There's a lot of things that I really appreciate the modern world and don't want to see it disappear, because I have to do things by hand.
Yeah.
I use Google and AI to look up stuff, whereas the generation below me seemed to just accept whatever was on the Guardian headline and never bother to check it.
Yeah.
I love the ability to check it, because when I was their age, you had to go to the university library just even to get the textbooks.
Exactly.
You discover the one that you needed was already taken out, or there was a waiting list. You have to get onto waiting lists to get various reading books. Then if you got hold of one, you try and photocopy it, but you needed these 10-cent pieces. So you'd have to go to the bank and have like a slug of 10-cent pieces.
Plastic bag
with it on the way home.
For the coins,
and then sometimes you'd find that people had run out of 10p pieces, so that they just ripped the pages out of the book that you'd been waiting on a waiting list to get to. Getting information was hard work. Even when I started working in the city, you had to actually go to company's house and get information about companies.
Yeah.
Now I just type in the name, and some of the first things that come up about a company is the information from Companies House.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. I love it. And
it is,
I think
but
that
now
we need to make these people do everything by hand first.
Yes.
Yeah,
You know,
but I mean, the other problem now, though, Catherine, is the scope not just to get lots of information, but scope to get lots of dis and misinformation. And the problem is that the government is one of the primary sources of dis and misinformation, because it's replete with these civil servants protecting their pensions and their one world, global view, and stopping, as you say, ordinary people from understanding the cogent facts, because it's not in their interest to allow the public to be well informed.
Well, you do have to keep asking the questions too. Like, I have looked at trade figures that have been handed out by the House of Commons Library, and they have to be sort of generalists. And when you say, well, actually, you've got the very top level of trade, you have to go into it bit by bit and go and look at it by the 6-figure HS code or the 10-figure HS code to really understand what's happening. And then they don't have the time or the knowledge to do that. In the same way that I discussed earlier, where I looked up, how many countries have reached net zero. If I just asked that first question, it wouldn't have actually told me what was happening. It was only the fact that I added some other questions and said, how much have their emissions dropped? How much have they gone down since 1990, which is the Paris Agreement level that the UK is using. Not all countries use 1990, but the UK is using 1990. So I wanted to see how much their emissions had dropped. And I also asked it to tell me how they did it. And once you add those extra questions, you realize that it's a nonsense to claim that they've actually reached net zero. Because in 2 cases, they were already at net zero, and they've actually increased their emissions, and they're still at net zero because they have so many forests. And in the other case, it's not to do with them. It's the fact that shipping has increased by so much since 1970.
But the other 2 questions that would have been worth asking is, what is the GDP per capita of these countries that have achieved net zero, and what is their energy consumption per capita?
Well,
and you'd find they're right down in the bottom left-hand corner of the wealth versus energy consumption, or GDP. And the ones that are at the top right-hand corner are the United States, although not so much. China now is in the top right-hand corner, high energy consumption per capita, high GDP per capita, and we are sliding that way, back towards medieval serfdom.
100%. I didn't ask those questions because I already knew the answer.
But those are the questions that never get asked in the mainstream media.
And there'll be people who don't even know where these countries are. So
I don't know where Suriname is. I know it's somewhere in the Southeast Asia, Southeast Pacific somewhere, but no idea.
No. It's in South America. It's a really good.
Is it okay? My geography was never that great.
It's near Guyana. No, you're not alone. I find that one of the reasons I think I was put on the Trade and Agriculture Commission was because I knew where all the countries were. It amazed me. From Australia, I was obsessed with globes and traveling in countries from a very young age. But it amazes me how many people in Britain who once used to rule the world. You once had this amazing thing called the British Empire that covered the world. The sun never set. And yet a huge number of British people don't know where countries are.
I know where the big places are, but I don't know so much America. The only reason I passed my geography at O-level was that the guy who always came top in geography, I said, why you get such good marks? He said, I draw these really detailed maps of the places, and then I put a bit of text underneath, and it always gets me top marks. So I was good at drawing, wasn't so good at geography, and I just used to do. The problem was you spent so much time penciling crayon, coloured crayons, because there were no printers in those days.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
I ended up hating geography as a result, because it was just a total waste of time. If I wanted to get decent marks, I had to draw pretty pictures.
Well, we didn't have that, but I must say I did drop geography at O-level, even though I was quite good at it. But I found that I have fallen back on information I got. we had a fantastic geography teacher. I don't know if
Yeah,
she's still
I think that
alive, but if
helps.
you are, you did well. Because we also did geology. We had to understand all of the different parts of the Pacific, the Micronesia versus Melanesia versus Polynesia, things that you'll never learn in the UK.
Yeah.
But a whole lot of stuff about savanna landscapes and when they get rainfall, when they don't, cyclones versus hurricanes, you know. Stuff, it covered, you know, what would now be meteorology, geology, all sorts of stuff that people need to know. And they don't learn it anywhere.
No, they're not taught it anywhere now.
Subject. Someone should bring that back, because this is basic stuff that, because people don't know it, they are easily hoodwinked by the environmentalists trying to sell them snake oil.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
They don't go, oh, hang on a minute, you know.
Well, it's like
true, you know?
there are no highly qualified geologists in the IPCC.
I know.
None.
And yet,
and people like Ian Plimer, if you talk to him about climate, he'll tell you that we've had much more, well, as I said before, ups and downs in climate, much more severe, aggressive and intense than we're getting at the moment. And if you actually plot out the 1.4 degrees Celsius that they're worried about since, you know, the 1970s, the bottom, and you look at a sort of typical UK 30 degrees Celsius down to -6, which is probably typical temperature range, average about 12 degrees, you can barely see it, just runs along. It doesn't, you know, you wouldn't even notice if we didn't have all this sophisticated measurement equipment. We wouldn't even have known.
Yeah. The whole thing of an average world temperature is completely barking. It was never the case. And yes, when they like to quote things like 97% of scientists agree, you will find that that's scientists of all types and shapes. And when you look into the actual paper, it was only 97% of the people who responded, who didn't just put the whole thing.
Who expressed strong opinions.
But
two-thirds had no opinion, so they left them out.
But the point that I'm saying in this is, because if you ask geologists, I think you would discover that 99 to 100% of geologists do not believe that global warming is A, unusual, or B, a bad thing. You know, most of them can point to, in fact, my geography teacher, bless her, when we went on school excursions into the countryside, every time you went through a highway where there was a cut in the road, she would be pointing out, you know, the lava flows that you can see in places in Australia, in the road cuts. You can see the changes in the soil types and the rock types and the different things just in a highway. And she'd always be pointing these things out. And it's incredible how we've now got this generation of kids who don't notice those sort of things. And maybe in the UK, you don't see that so often. You don't have these big cuts through mountain ranges where you can see changes in different types.
You certainly see it in Scotland a lot. You know, if you go over to the west of Scotland, which is similar to Scandinavia, and it's like tipped, you know. But not some around some of the areas around the south coast. I think, you know, it's also evident, and Wales, but not in the sort of the vast majority of England, I guess. Yeah.
Well, that's
interesting.
And so you've got to see that stuff, and so geologists know that, in fact, you know, the reason all of the oil companies know that this has happened before. They know they're getting oil that was once a lush forest, and they're getting it in a place that's now a desert. You know, we know from pictures of life in Egypt, and this is in the arts world, people in the arts world, or the archaeologists can show you pictures of them making bread in Egypt on the Egyptian hieroglyphics and in their tombs. And you look at the desert and go, wow, they were growing wheat here and making bread. That's interesting. How did they do that? You know, these massive civilizations, such as, you know, in the middle of the Sudan, you know, that was once a hugely thriving population. You know, people didn't move into Europe because, you know, it was a nice place to live. They only moved there as the ice melted and the land got hotter in the center, and they started moving north. So it's kind of crazy that we're now going, oh no, we've got to stop. Everything's got to stop right now. It's got to be just like it is. I'm going, well, no, we've been here before. We've done this before.
Yeah.
Yes, it might mean you're going to move to Scotland, and that will be hard. We understand your pain, but it's got really beautiful beaches. I can tell you the west coast of Scotland has the most magnificent beaches I've ever seen. Yeah. And you should buy the land now because it's very, very cheap.
I've got a friend.
Beachfront property.
Yeah.
And in about 100 years' time, it might be warm enough to put your toes in the water. But I'm not guaranteeing that last one because that's a long way off.
Good friend of mine lives in Lossiemouth?
Yeah.
Right up on the RAC bases. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic beaches. He says it's great, but you can only walk on it about 5 times a year. It's freezing.
A thing about the Scottish, like Billy Connolly says, a lot of them love Scotland and they'll sing about Scotland, but they're not living in Scotland, they're living in England.
Well, that's like the Irish,
Yes.
I'm always shocked at how many Irish people seem to run Westminster. And you sit there going, but hang on a minute, why are you even there?
Well, I've just come back from the Canary Islands, and the amount of Irish bars that are there now, it's crazy. There's not many English bars now, Irish bars. We were actually in one, and this young Irish couple, we were chatting away with them, having a laugh and a joke, and she suddenly says, "So what brought you to an Irish bar?" I thought, I'd never even considered why. I mean, it just,
Many years ago, I lived in...
Yeah.
I used to live in Paris, and there was a fantastic Irish bar in the centre of Paris, close to where I lived. Yeah. And it was fantastic because you could go there on a Sunday and have a full English breakfast of eggs and bacon, which is unheard of in Paris at the time. This was back in the 80s. Paris was not at all international. If you were having breakfast, you were having sort of bread and coffee. But on a Sunday, I could go out to the Irish bar, which opened early, and at night they served sort of Guinness and oysters. But at the morning, they did a full English breakfast.
Well, full Irish breakfast, I guess they call
it. bit of white pudding on there just to make it Irish. There you go.
Okay. It was great,
Oh dear.
Well, we've covered quite a lot of ground, Catherine. I think we've reached the sort of area where we would sort of top and tail it because we've been recording for about an hour. One of the other people we want to have on is Catherine Porter, and I would like to get both of you on together because she would cover the physics side of the problem and you cover the economic side, and I think that helps with the perspective. But Catherine's just recovering from an operation at the minute, so we will try to reschedule that at some point if you'd be happy to do that.
I'd love to, actually, because that's the two sides of the coin.
Yeah.
And it's important that people understand the physics of it. I would come at it from the chemistry. I was also a chemistry major. We're both people who started in science and ended up in economics.
Yes.
So there's a lot of ground that has to be covered because we're doing crazy things to our economy for absolutely no reason.
That's the sad thing, isn't it?
They're enormously destructive. Whether well-intentioned or not, I don't think that's important. The point is they're enormously destructive and have to be stopped. It's as simple as that.
The important thing to remember, I'll end on this, the world has increased its CO2 emissions by 1 trillion tonnes since 1990. And the UK actually increased its emissions last year slightly. So we got down to a 50% cut from 1990 by not counting our imports. And it actually came up a little bit last year in 2024. But our percentage of the world's emissions has gone from 1% to 0.85%.
Yeah.
So even though our emissions went up, our proportion went down because the world is using more energy and producing more CO2
to drive up living standards.
Making a blind bit of difference. And
absolutely.
All we've done is kill our industry. That's all we've achieved.
And make our way of life worse.
But we're virtue signaling our way to oblivion.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's worse than that, because if you actually looked at, say, draw a line of our 1990 emissions and measure the amount we've saved each year and add it up and compare it to the amount we've imported over the same time period, our imports are 40% higher than our savings.
Yeah.
So we're actually making no difference whatsoever.
Yeah. Well,
In fact,
except
sorry,
the
I said
whole of our
40%.
economy is spiraling down the plug hole.
Yes, exactly.
Well, on that cheery note.
Well, there is this assumption that we're all going to get nice service industry jobs and we can stop working in those smelly factories. It's just a pity that all of those factories are in anchor employers in important regional places. And there is no, when the activists closed down the last thermal coal mine in Wales, which was not getting any subsidy, so it was actually viable economically, which amazed me. They closed it down. So 180 people lost their job in a place in Wales where there is not other employment for 180 former coal miners. And this regional disparity, the same morons that actively closed that coal mine will now be complaining about the number of people living on welfare. And when you say, well, what did you think they were going to do when you closed their refinery, or you closed their cement company, or you closed
their titanium dioxide factory,
the titanium dioxide factory. Where did you think they were going to go? Well, you're a bad example because you started a podcast, so you're okay.
But that came rather later.
Yeah, I know. But, there'll be a lot of other people who don't have the ability to start a podcast, and they will be just, sitting at home on welfare. You can't have it both ways. You either have industry and employment and tax collection, or you just have a lot of people on welfare and an ever-increasing government borrowing to pay for all of the money you're paying them. And eventually you're going to find that the people lending you money to pay for that
will stop
putting up the price they want to subsidize your living standards.
Profligacy.
Well, when you look at the fact that the UK is paying a higher interest rate for its bonds than any other developed country, and quite a few what I would call less developed countries, you sit there thinking, well, why did we have to pay more? And we have to pay more because we have less ability to pay for ourselves. And everyone's looking at that going, oh, this isn't going to end well. And everyone's looking at our currency going, that currency is pretty high compared to the dollar and the euro and the yen and pretty much everyone else. It's only a matter of time before they expect our currency to collapse. And so they're building that premium into the price. And, we've got politicians going, oh, no, it'll be fine. We'll just join the EU. It'll be fine. Join the euro. And then the Germans can pay our bills, even though Germany's going down the gurgler as well.
Well, I'm afraid at this point, Mr. Croakey's going to have to bow out.
All right. Well,
so I shall bid you farewell. I'll let you tie things up, and I hope to see you soon, Catherine.
Yeah,
all
thank
right,
you.
Thanks,
we'll
sorry you're sick.
See you soon.
Okay.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks for your time.
Bye.
Bye. Mr. Croakey. Of course, he's got to go and get off to the chemist, and then go to the doctors to get some antibiotics for his throat.
Okay.
I don't know where Charlotte is. I think we may have to just pull it there, and Charlotte will top and tail it afterwards, because I think she had to go out as well. Anyway, thanks again, Catherine. It's really good.
Time, but always a pleasure to speak to you, and I'll try and work out how to turn this off, I'm sure.
It's